So very, very important, understanding valuation. So let's get into a little bit of theory, and then we'll get into what this stuff actually means, right? So what we're going to cover is valuation based on income, right? Because don't forget, folks, as you probably learned when you got your license, there are 3 different ways that valuation can be derived for a property. One being the income approach, which is what we're going over tonight. The other approach, can anyone remember? They use it in on the residential side mainly, or I should say mostly. In terms of this, it's the one that's used the most. It begins with a C. Can anyone tell me in the comments which one they think it is? It begins with a C. First word C, second word S. Anybody? 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 Cost, closed. Think about it. When you compare something to another, what's that called? Comparable sales, right? Oh, close. CMA. Okay, good. So there's 3 methods, guys, right? There's the income approach. There's comps, right, which is comparative sales. And then there's the cost approach, which is basically if a hurricane or a tornado came through and knocked this property down, what would it cost to replace it? But that's usually mostly by like insurance companies and that sort of thing. So, but the one that's most important, and when you're selling income or investment grade income producing properties, the one that we're going to concentrate most on is going to be the income approach. So the process of quantitatively evaluating a real estate investment for its viability and potential is called underwriting, right? It's basically how to put a price tag on a given property. Now, we're going to go over a basic formula and more in-depth formula. So guys, I want to demystify this for a lot of you. Okay. What you wind up seeing in a variety of places, there's a lot of, people say, oh, this is very difficult. This is very complex. No, it really isn't, right? Money comes into a property in the form of rents, or additional income. It goes out in the form of expenses, and what's left over is your net income. Okay. Maybe you pay a mortgage, maybe you don't, but that's the basics. Money comes in to the landlord. You pay the landlord rent. He pays out expenses, whatever he might be paying, might be common area maintenance, might be property taxes. And at the end of the day, there's some money left over. That's called net income. That's the basics. Okay. Now, if you look on the right side of the screen, you have your rental income. Okay. That's pretty simple. Money that comes in from rents. Can anybody tell me, and some of the new folks that are hopping on, let me know what you think in terms of what additional income can come from a building. Go ahead and type it in the chats for me, guys. I'm curious. What do you think, Phil? What do you think, Jimmy? What do you think, Jose? What do you think, Alex? Let me know. Billboards. Ooh, I like where you're going with this. Good. Yeah. That's one I haven't gotten. Yep, but absolutely. I just sold a building with a billboard back in December. A laundromat, yes. So the coin op laundry in an apartment building, absolutely. Who else? How about Julio? How about Agent Pete? What do you guys think? Stephanie? Vending machines. Yep. Love it. Vending. Absolutely. Okay. Good. All these things, guys. Liquor. Yeah. So if it has like a convenience store, the apartment building I just used to live in, had a convenience store on the ground floor, and they absolutely sold beer and wine. So yes, all these things will attribute to additional income. Okay. So when you take your rental income and you add your additional income to it, that's going to be called your potential gross income. Okay. Now, no building is 100% occupied 100% of the time. It's just law of averages. Sooner or later, you're going to have the building empty a month. Someone moves out and you don't get someone in time. Or you're going to have someone that's unwilling or unable to pay. And so, like for instance, with COVID last year, a bunch of landlords had to take it on the chin, especially in places like California, where they basically said, tenants don't have to pay. Guess what? You tell a tenant that they don't have to pay. A lot of them, even if they are able to, they're unwilling to, right? So you get certain circumstances like we had with COVID that you had a lot of that going on. So what you have to do is you have to assess a vacancy and collection loss factor. Usually this is presented in the form of a percentage, right? So for instance, let's say just for easy math, the building brings in, let's say $90,000 of rental income, $10,000 of additional income. That's going to give you a PGI or potential gross income of 100,000. But of that 100,000, maybe 10% of the time there's either a vacancy or there's collection issues, right? Maybe it's in a neighborhood where people are real fly by night, and or in a city that's very transitional or what have you, right? So you have to always account for that, because you have to be very realistic. Whenever you're underwriting a property, You know, there's best case scenario and then there's real world. So you're always trying to be real world. Now, can you guys do me a favor? Okay. When you're representing the seller, okay, do you want to be more conservative or less conservative with underwriting a building? Okay. This is an important fact. So do me a favor, type in the chat whether you think, just say more or less. Okay. Go ahead and put that in the chat because I want you guys to understand something about when you're underwriting a property. When you're going to be taking a listing, it's very important that you know what the property should be valued at, right? So Stephanie says more, Jimmy says more, Mary says more. Guys, I love it. Yes, you're on the right track. The reason being, okay, if you were to allow the owner of a building to underwrite their property, they're going to write, it's going to be pie in the sky. It's going to be best case scenario. It's going to be, well, this never happens. Well, that never happens. I've owned this building for X amount of years and yada, yada, yada. That's great, Mr. Smith. That's great, Mrs. Jones. But the bottom line is that what you are underwriting for is not what the building is currently operating at, right? What you have to be looking at is from the perspective of the next person coming along. One of the best compliments I get when I underwrite properties and other brokers see it, they're like, oh, these are actual numbers. I'm like, yeah, they're actual numbers. You know, because there's some brokerages that like, they'll say it's a 7 cap or whatever. And meanwhile, it's a 5.5 when you really look at it, because they're like, oh, well, they didn't account for vacancy. Oh, they didn't account for property taxes changing. What I like to do is take a building, throw everything and the kitchen sink at it, so that we know that these numbers will stand up, you know, you can actually stand behind your work. Very, very important, folks. Okay. So yes. So when you're underwriting a property, you want the next person coming along to understand, okay, this is highly likely what this is going to actually operate at. Very, very important. And not enough brokers do it. And frankly, it leads to a lack of trust. I don't want to say dishonesty, because it's not someone being dishonest. It's someone being overly optimistic, let's say. Okay. But very, very important to understand, folks, that when you're underwriting a property, it has to be for the next person coming along. Mr. Smith might be doing it and his son might be cutting the grass. His brother-in-law, you know, might be doing the cleanup in the parking lot. He might be coming by on Saturday mornings with a weed whacker. Well, guess what? The next person more than likely is not going to operate it like Mr. Jones or Mr. Smith did. Instead, that they're going to hire a landscaper. They're going to hire a company to clean up the parking lot. They're going to hire somebody to do this. So all these things need to be accounted for. Okay. So going back to it. So once you take your PGI, your potential gross income, and you subtract out your vacancy and collection loss, you have your effective gross income. Easy enough. Now, once we have that number, then we subtract out our operating expenses. Okay. Very, very important, folks. Can anybody tell me the difference? Okay, the two type of expenses. One I already gave you, operating, and the other one begins with a C. Anyone tell me what that is? What kind of expenses that is? Ooh, Alex on fire. Yeah, CapEx, right? Capital expenditures. Now, okay, here we go, guys. So we have operating expenses and we have capital expenses. Okay, can anybody tell me the difference between operating expenses and capital expenses? If we were to describe operating expenses, we would use 2 words. This is like the litmus test. This is like the test to see whether or not they are an operating expense or a capital expense. If they are, can anybody tell me 2 words that begin with R? 2 words that begin with R. Operating is the cost to run the building. Yes, absolutely. Okay. It's the cost to run the building, but we're going to get a little bit more specific. Awesome point, Stephanie. That's really, really good. Exactly. Repetitive, that's very close. It's going to be regular and recurring. Okay. Regular and recurring. Here's the thing, folks. If you can remember that operating expenses have to be, in order to something to qualify as an operating expense, you have to know that it's regular and recurring. Okay. So let's talk about it. Let's go to the next slide and I'm going to show you. So once you subtract out your operating expenses, you get your net operating income. So can anybody tell me something that is regular and recurring in, let's say, an apartment building? Go ahead, put it in the chats. PGE. What do you mean by PGE, Alex? PGE. Lights. Okay. Cleaning. Yep. Utilities. Property management. Love it. Power. 100%. Yeah. Oh, power, gas, electric, I guess you meant? Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Now, here's the thing. It's only power, gas, and electric if the landlord is paying for it. If the building is separately metered and they have individual water meters and gas meters and electric meters, Oh yeah, PG&E there. Yeah, yeah. We have FP&L here, like Florida Power and Light. In Jersey is PSE&G. But yeah, okay, I gotcha. Yes, but here's the thing. Yes, it takes power, gas, electricity to run a property, but only if the landlord is coming out of pocket for it. If it's the expense is borne by the tenants, then you don't have to worry about it. Okay, but good, love it. Yeah, property taxes, absolutely, Joshua. Exactly, guys. So here's the cool thing, right? We can identify what these things are now. These are all great examples. Now let's flip that. Okay. Yeah. Common areas, common area maintenance, Stephanie. Absolutely. Yeah. So here's the thing. Can anybody tell me what the an example of a capital expense, something that's not regular and recurring? Okay. So let's see what we got. Remodel. Yep. Okay. Yep. Paving a parking lot. Ding, ding, ding. Rosa. Love it. Love it. Special assessment. Yep. Painting. Yep. Painting, it could be considered maintenance. Yeah. How about this, guys? What leaks sometimes during a rainstorm? What about that? Go ahead and put that in the chat. There we go. Exactly. Okay. Yep. Roof and structure. So what's another thing? What's something that that gets changed every, I don't know, 20 years or so? Let's say like high efficiency HVAC. Love it. Yep, exactly. You guys, you're getting the point. I love this. This is really, really good. Okay. So yes, so regular recurring is going to be, it's going to be, Stephanie says electrical mechanics. So what I was referring to is rooftop HVAC units, windows, like hurricane windows. You don't change them every year. You change them every 20 years, maybe 30 years, you know, that type of thing. But you guys get the idea, right? The parking lot, resurfacing the parking lot or changing the parking lot, redoing the facade of a building. These are capital expenditures, and they're treated differently by your accountant, and they're treated differently in how you pay tax in the building, okay? Do closing costs count? No, that's a one-time thing, and great question, Joshua. Closing costs, they get counted in with what's called your acquisition costs, right? So, which leads me to my next point. Thank you for the segue. So what it is, so when you bring money in, I'm just going to give real simple round numbers. Let's say you have $100,000 of rental income plus additional income, okay? And then you subtract out your vacancy loss, which is 10%. So let's just say it's 90,000 of effective gross income, and your operating expenses are $30,000. Real simple math, okay? So what's left over is 90 minus 30 equals $60,000. You with me so far? Okay. So what you would pay taxes on is not the $100,000 top line. You'd pay taxes on what's left over after you subtract out the vacancy and collection loss. Well, if your vacancy and collection loss is actually accurate, then you obviously would not be paying taxes on money you're not getting, right? And so you'll be left over. You're paying taxes on the 60,000. Okay, with me so far? So, and let's say your operating expenses 1 year went from 30,000 to 40,000. Instead of having 60,000 left over, you got 50,000 left over. So that's what's actually taxable. Okay. Now, those are operating expenses, and that's how it has to do. So when you go to pay, you go to pay your taxes at the end of the year, your accountant's going to ask what the building made, what's left over. We're not going to talk about depreciation, any of that stuff. Basically, your tax burden is going to be what's left, what's on the NOI. Okay, just to keep it simplistic. Okay, on the other side of that, so Joshua was asking about closing costs, right? Let's say you bought a building for $500,000, and let's say there was $30,000 of closing costs, right? You know, you had to do surveys, and you had to do an environmental, and yada 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 yada, all this other stuff, and attorneys and all this other stuff. Let's say there's just $30,000 for a nice round number. You take the $500,000 you bought the building for. You add on 30,000 because that's your what's called the cost of acquisition, and then any capital expenses that you put in the building. So let's say you went in and you changed the roof, which was $50,000. Okay, so you went from 500 plus 30 plus 50, you're at 580 now. Okay, and let's say you resurface the parking lot and put new stripes in it, and it cost you $20,000. Boom! Now you are at 600,000. Can anyone tell me what that is called? That 600,000 is called a blank basis. Okay. The word begins with an A. It begins with an A. So when you take the cost of the property plus the cost of acquisition of the property plus any capital expenses you made in the property, and that's called your Getting close. Associated costs. No, it's called your adjusted basis, right? Or your stepped up basis, right? You step up your basis because of the acquisition cost and any capital expenditures. When you go to sell the property, let's say you sold it, just real easy math. Let's say you sold it for $1 million. Okay. You are taxed on the difference between the sale price and your adjusted basis, not on what you paid for it. So my point is, the more, so in this case, it will be 100,000 minus 600,000. You'd be responsible for a tax liability on that $400,000 difference. You with me? As opposed to 100,000 minus what you paid for it. Okay, so that's where capital expenses come into play. So when they're operating expenses, they get expensed against your income, okay, and they're taken out at the end of your income for the year. And when they're capital expenses, they are stepped up to the cost of acquiring the property, the acquisition cost, the purchase price plus closing costs, and you are then left with what's called a stepped up basis. The way you can put improvements into your building, and it's going to lessen the burden, the capital tax, the capital gains burden that you have. Okay, everybody good with this so far? So far, so good? Yes, yes. Okay. And all right, cool. So, Scott, I see Scott's on. Hey, Scott, I was bragging about you today, buddy. I was telling the folks at Red Door, the company I spoke to earlier today, about the $62,000 check that you cashed from the Sphere of Influence training we did. So sorry, but thanks, buddy. I always love to share your wins. All right, so guys, so this is what everything is here, right? Property valuation based on income. Okay, like I mentioned, rental income plus additional income equals PGI. You subtract out your vacancy and collection loss. You're left with your effective gross income. You subtract out your operating expenses, and you're left with your net operating income, or NOI. Cool. Okay. So far, so good. So this is just kind of like I gave you examples of rental income and additional income and so forth. But you guys are really picking up on this. I love it. Okay. So now, guys, there are different metrics of evaluating properties. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people, let's see, you're selling a home. A 3-2 condo is a 3-2 condo. Maybe one's got a swimming pool. Maybe one has an extra bathroom, this and that, the other thing. You adjust for square footage, and it's pretty much very simple. But it's not quite the same thing in commercial, because the properties tend to be more unique. They have to have different characteristics, and all things being equal, one property might be operating differently than another property. And here's what I mean. You have two buildings side by side, okay? They're both built the exact same year by the exact same builder, the exact same condition, okay? And two twins bought them. John bought this one and Jamie bought this one, okay? Right? Now, John is a better businessman than Jamie, okay? John is getting $100,000 a year in income, okay? And then he's got $30,000 of operating expenses. So he's got $70,000 that he's putting in his pocket every year. And Jamie has $100,000 of income coming in from the rents, but he's not really good with like managing the property, and he's got like $55,000 of operating expenses. So he's only putting $45K in his pocket. Okay, so John has $70,000 to put in his pocket. Jamie has $45,000 he has in his pocket. You guys with me so far? Okay, so the gross rent multiplier is basically how many years at the gross rents you will, how many years it would take for the building to pay for itself. Okay, so as an example, right? Let's say the building is valued at $1 million. Okay, the gross rent multiplier is going to be identical for both properties. Why? Because the gross rents are exactly the same. Okay, so and it's unfair, frankly, to assign the same number to both properties. So think about it. Both properties have the exact amount of rent coming in, but the profit or the NOI, the money that they're putting in their pockets, is very, very different. So because my opinion is, a lot of people talk about gross rent multiplier. I have yet to meet a sophisticated investor that even talks about gross rent multiplier, although it's in every real estate text and probably on every real estate test across the country. My point is, there are different metrics of evaluating properties, but they're not all created equal. Each one of them tells you a different story. Gross rent multiplier just tells you, if you take the gross rents, how many years it'll take for you to pay for the property. So for instance, like the $1 million property, you got your $100,000 coming in a year. That the gross rent multiplier is 10 because 100,000 times 10 equals $1 million. End of story, right? But that doesn't tell the whole story. What tells the whole story is the capitalization rate. So all things being equal, again, one property is bringing in both properties are bringing in $100,000. Okay. One that the owner's putting $70,000 in his pocket. The other, the owner's putting $35,000 in his pocket. Guess what? Those properties are not valued the same way when using capitalization approach. Okay. One is going to be worth literally double the other. Okay. And we're going to get into what that means. So I know this is a lot of information, but stay with me, right? The capitalization rate is the relationship between an income producing property's net operating income, or NOI, and its value, or the purchase price. So here's what I mean. The formula goes net operating income divided by purchase price. And this is also referred to as cap rate. So people say cap rate, cap rate, cap rate. Don't, I know it's a nuance, but don't confuse cap rate with rate of return. The cap rate is merely a snapshot at a given moment in time of the property's value. Very, very important to understand. Okay. So if there's, let's say you give me a spreadsheet and it has the income here, the operating expenses here, I'm going, and you're asking $1 million for the building, I'm going to assign a cap rate, 7.26%. Okay. But Monday morning comes and there's a snowstorm and there's 12 inches of snow and the snow plower has to come out and the owner has to pay for that out of his pocket. Guess what? That cap rate for that property just changed. So the cap rate is literally one snapshot at any given moment in time. And that's what you're left with. Okay. So it's very, very important to understand. People think that it's over a long period of time. No. It's just one moment in time. All you really care about is the moment in time that you buy the building. Right. But so moving on from there. So if you look at it, it's the relationship between the NOI and its value. So in this case, the NOI is 70,000. The purchase price is $1 million. The cap rate is then 7%, because 7% of the value of the property, this 7% times the value of the property equals 70,000. You guys with me so far? Can you guys give me some thumbs up? Let me know. We're going to get to Irv in just a second. Good. I love it, Steph. You're reading ahead. Good. Okay. So what in the world is a cap rate? Ask Irv. Okay. So Irv is a formula used when valuing income producing properties. Okay. So if you know two of the three variables, you can figure out the third. Okay. So the three variables are income, rate, and value, I, R, and V. So just a second ago, we just solved for it, right? We knew the income, we knew the value. So we were able to solve for the rate, just like simple algebra, right? When you have two items and a variable, you have one variable, you can solve for the variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the other two ways. So before we knew the income and we knew the value, we solved for the rate. Now we're going to solve for the income and also the value. Okay. So income is net operating income, pretty straightforward. Rate is expressed as a percentage. In this case, we're talking about cap rate, rate of return, it's slightly different, but cap rate. Okay. And then V is the value. Now, the formula is expressed in three ways. Number one, if you know the rate and the value, you can figure out the income. So for instance, if the building is worth $1 million and the rate of return is 8%, guess what? The income, or NOI, is $80,000. Okay, so far so good. Cool. Now, take a next step, right? If the formula is, if you know the value and the income, you can figure out the rate. Very similar to the first example, right? So if that same building is worth $1 million and the income is 75,000, then the rate equals 75,000 divided by 1 million, and it's 7.5%. So far, so good, guys. Do me a favor. Give me a 1 in the chat. Let me know that you're with me. And I'm just gonna double check, make sure I don't have any questions in the chat over on Facebook. Give me a second. Okay, cool. Awesome. Great. All right, folks. So, okay. So going to the next slide. The formula is also expressed that if you know the income and the rate, you can figure out the value. So if the same building is producing annually $100,000 and the rate of return is 8%, then the value is 1.25 million. Now we use this one quite a bit when we have a property where you're representing the buyer and you know what that buyer wants to purchase the property for. I say, hey, go out and find me a 7 cap. Go out and find me a 5.5 cap. Go out and find me an 8.25 cap, whatever that might be. And if you get the sheets and you're looking at it, you're like, okay, rent roll is 100,000, operating expenses is 35,000. There's a $65,000 NOI. You take $65,000, you divide by whatever the desired cap rate is, and that's what the buyer would be willing to pay for that property. Does that make sense, guys? Do me a favor, type 2 in the chat. This can be kind of dense, but when you get used to it, it'll just roll over or off your tongue because it's very, very straightforward algebra once you get comfortable with the concepts. Okay, cool, awesome. David Lee says 2, 2, 2. Love it, Sherry. Awesome, awesome. Sherry, good to see you. Glad you're feeling better. Awesome. All right, guys. So what we have here is, as I mentioned, the gross rent multiplier. This is the ratio of the price of a real estate investment to its annual rental before accounting for expenses such as property taxes, insurance, and utilities. Like I mentioned, guys, 2 brothers bought 2 buildings. They operate completely different. They bring in the same amount of rent. One has double the operating expenses as the other, but according to the gross rent multiplier, they're literally considered equal. It's not an effective metric, okay? Like I said, the GRM is the number of years the property would take to pay back for itself in gross rents received. Guess what, guys? Unless it's triple net, you're paying money out of your pocket. So the amount of operating expenses you have to play into that, okay? So guys, so what I wanted to show you folks, this is just a sample of the process of underwriting, understanding, you know, what's involved in underwriting, understanding what it takes to value a property properly. Again, valuation is so important. And the reason it's so important is if you don't value a property properly, it will never, ever sell. Okay. The people that believe some greater fool is going to come around, and they could call it the greater fool theory. Like, well, I paid X, Y for it. So some idiot is going to come and pay me 20% above market. Guess what, folks? It doesn't work that way. Think about it logically. If this person was so inept, right? They wouldn't have millions of dollars at their disposal because they didn't get to having millions of dollars from making foolish decisions and decisions that were not wise financially. Okay. So everyone thinks, oh yeah. And it's the worst thing ever is trying to talk, you know, an owner, you know, explain to them why the property is worth, you know, what the market's willing to pay for it, not what they want for it. And oftentimes they just think, oh, somebody's just going to magically give them more than the market bears. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. But what I want to impress upon you guys right now, you know, you have an understanding of this. You know the concepts, right? Or at least you understand the concepts. You go from understanding to knowing to owning. Okay.